Welcome to the image analysis for foot. Image analysis guidelines for the AP axial projection state that there should be equal distancing or spacing, between the second through fifth metatarsals. 1/3 of the talus is superimposing the calcaneus. The joint spaces between the medial and intermediate cuneiform should be open. The tarsometatarsal and navicular cuneiform joint spaces are demonstrated as open. The third metatarsal base should be at the center of the exposure field. Proximal calcaneus, talar neck, tarsals, metatarsals, phalanges, and the foot soft tissue should all be included within the field of view. I have included the image analysis guidelines within the presentation. So let's look at foot rotation for the AP projection. When the foot is rotated laterally, the metatarsal bases demonstrate increased superimposition, as you can see here. The medial and intermediate cuneiform joint space are basically superimposed over top of each other, okay? And they're demonstrated as closed. The talus here starts to move over top the calcaneus, resulting in more than that 1/3 of the talus superimposing the calcaneus. Now, with medial rotation, the metatarsal bases demonstrate here decreased superimposition. The medial and intermediate cuneiform joint space here is still demonstrated as closed. And the talus, as you can see, starts to move away from the calcaneus, resulting in less than 1/3 of the talus superimposing the calcaneus. The middle projection here is supposed to give you a reference point. Because of the distortion with the copying and pasting of the image, it may be a little hard to see some of the anatomic structure, so you may have to go back to the original image to compare. Wanted to give you a little insight into when you have poor central ray alignment, and you may need to increase the angle if you forgot to put an angle on at all. You should know that the central ray for an AP foot is 10 to 15 degrees proximal. In the case that you have a perpendicular central ray, your joint spaces will be closed in the toes. Your joint spaces between the tarsal metatarsals will be closed, and the joint spaces between the navicular here and cuneiforms will be closed. So this causes for a repeat. So make sure you put on an AP or a axial angulation central ray for an AP axial foot. In this first image analysis practice, we really want to take a look at is there any rotation in the projection? And as you can see, there is definitely equal distance between the tarsal bones. So I would say that it's safe to say that there's no rotation. However, we also want to look at our angulation. And with looking at our angulation, we need to see if our tarsometatarsal joint spaces here are open. And unfortunately, they are not. Unfortunately, they are not. And so that should indicate to you that we have an insufficient central ray. So you may need to correct that image by directing the central ray 10 to 15 degrees proximally, and retake the projection. So for our next practice analysis of the AP axial foot, we first want to look for rotation. The first thing that I see is that the joint spaces between the medial and intermediate cuneiform here is closed, okay? So that should be your first key indicator of rotation. The second key indicator is that the metatarsal bases are demonstrated with decreased superimposition. So we have some rotation here. Also, the calcaneus is demonstrated with no talar superimposition. So this should indicate to you that the foot was medially rotated. It obviously is slightly rotated here. So in order to correct this, we need to rotate the foot back to its lateral side so that the foot is flat against the IR. The next thing you want to look for in this projection is if we have open joint spaces, because we want to make sure we have the appropriate central ray. And so we have our navicular cuneiform joint spaces open and our metatarsal joint spaces open. So therefore the central ray is good. So let's move on to our AP oblique projection. Image analysis guidelines, I'm sorry, wrong image. Image analysis guidelines for the AP oblique projection state that the cuboid should be free of superimposition. The third through fifth intermetatarsal joint spaces should be demonstrated as open. The tarsi sinus and the fifth metatarsal tuberosity are to be visualized and in profile. The third metatarsal base is at the center of the exposure field, and the phalanges, metatarsals, tarsals, calcaneus, and foot soft tissue are all to be included within the exposure field. Here are those guidelines for you to review. I wanted to provide to you a couple different projections of patients with different medial arches. The first one is representative of a low medial arch. And when you have a patient with a low medial arch, that degree of obliquity for the foot for 30 degrees may be sufficient to free that cuboid up of superimposition. An average medial arch may take a little bit more degree of obliquity to free that foot up. And so you may have to increase 10 degrees to get that. And in a high medial arch, you may have to increase 15 degrees to obtain that cuboid free of superimposition. Each one of these images are adequately positioned to obtain the image evaluation criteria. I understand on the high medial arch that the metatarsals are superimposing. However, this is patient dependent. So let's take a look at the AP oblique foot with insufficient obliquity. When there's insufficient obliquity, the cuneiform cuboid joint space, the navicular cuboid joint space, and the third through fifth metatarsal joint spaces will all be demonstrated as closed here. So these joint spaces here and the joint spaces right here, and right here, okay, will all be demonstrated as closed. And that is when you're insufficiently obliqued. To really be grounded in knowing that you are insufficiently oblique, you should really evaluate the intermetatarsal joint space between the 4th and 5th digit. If they are still superimposed, then you know you are in insufficient obliquity. In excessive obliquity, you want to evaluate the 4th through 5th intermetatarsal joint spaces. They will be demonstrated as closed. You also want to look at the 5th proximal metatarsal. It's usually in a profile and superimposing the 4th metatarsal tubercle. So let's look at our first practice analysis. As you can see, the first thing in an AP oblique projection is we should be asking ourselves, is the cuboid free of superimposition? Is that joint space open? And no, it's not. The next thing we want to look at is the lateral cuneiforms, and the 4th tubercle is demonstrated without superimposition over here, and I'll show you the 4th tubercle here is demonstrated without superimposition, okay, of the 5th metatarsal. So we are insufficiently rotated. We need to increase this degree of medial rotation in order to correct this image. In our second AP oblique foot practice analysis, we're going to look for that cuboid to be free of superimposition, so it's not. So now we need to determine, are we excessively rotated, or are we insufficiently? And the biggest thing we want to look for is the position of this this metatarsal and this 4th tubercle. And what is happening here is that the 5th metatarsal is superimposing over that 4th metatarsal tubercle again. So this indicates that the foot was over-rotated. We need to decrease the amount of obliquity of the medial foot rotation. Please move on to part 2 for the lateral projection image analysis.